At 3 in the morning, Ethan heard footsteps. Not heavy ones, careful ones, deliberately light, as if someone was learning how not to disturb a sleeping house. That alone made his eyes open. Ethan lay still for a moment, listening. The house had its own language at night. Pipes that sighed, floorboards that complained, the faint whir of an old heater fighting a losing war. But these steps weren't part of the house. They were controlled, measured. He slipped out of bed and eased his door open a crack. Only the nightlight in the living room was on, its glow pooling across the floor like warm water. Darian wasn't asleep. He sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders slightly rounded, as if he were afraid of taking up too much space in a home that wasn't his. In his hand was a sticker Alara must have dropped on the table. He held it between thumb and finger and stared at it like it contained scripture. A crooked smiley face, lopsided and bright. Darian's thumb moved slowly over the sticker's surface, a soft, absent caress. His eyes looked wet, as if something in him had gone waterlogged. Ethan's chest tightened in a way he didn't want to name. He didn't want to admit it, but he couldn't deny it either. This scene didn't fit the man he remembered. This wasn't the Darian who filled rooms with authority, who treated love like ownership, who used perfection like a cage. This was a man sitting in the dark, holding a child's sticker like a relic of time he'd lost. Darian felt Ethan's gaze and lifted his head. Their eyes met in the dim. Ethan's first instinct was to retreat, to close the door quietly and pretend he'd seen nothing. But Darian spoke first, voice low. "Did I wake you?" Ethan didn't answer. Darian hurried to add, too quick, like he was afraid of angering him, "I just couldn't sleep." Ethan's voice came out rough with sleep. "Did you used to have trouble sleeping too?" Darian's eyes flickered, struck by the word used to, as if Ethan had reached back through 5 years and touched something raw. He was silent for 2 beats. Then he said, slowly, "Before, I thought I couldn't sleep because of work." He looked at Ethan, gaze deep and steady. "Later, I realized it was because you weren't there." The sentence was too sweet. Sweet like poison. Ethan felt his fingers twitch. He hardened instantly, the old defense snapping up like a wall. "Don't say things like that." Darian didn't argue. He only nodded once, as if taking an order. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll put it away." And he did. He pulled his presence inward until his scent was barely there. Faint wood far away, nothing sharp, nothing that would press against an Omega's nerves. It was restraint, respect, and Ethan hated how much that small change shook him. He leaned against the doorway, voice low. "What are you going to do tomorrow? If you're seen here, people in town will—" "Let them see," Darian said evenly. "I'm not afraid." Ethan gave a humorless laugh. "Of course you're not. You're Darian Logan." Darian shook his head, slow and honest. "I am afraid." Ethan blinked. Darian held Ethan's gaze like he was handing over his deepest fear and letting Ethan decide what to do with it. "I'm afraid you'll close the door again," Darian said. "Afraid you'll disappear again. Afraid what I did 5 years ago will cost me any chance to make it right." Something in Ethan's chest constricted like a fist closing. He wanted to say, "You already lost your chance," but the words wouldn't come, because he understood too well. He was afraid too. Afraid of Darian's closeness, afraid of his instincts, afraid of being turned back into the Omega who couldn't breathe, afraid the children would get pulled into a storm they didn't deserve, and, most shamefully, afraid that some part of his heart would still respond. Ethan's throat tightened. In the end, all he said was, very quietly, "Go to sleep." Darian's eyes softened, as if the command was also comfort. "Okay," he whispered. He lay down on the couch and turned his back to Ethan, as if he feared that if he looked 1 second longer, he'd want too much. Ethan closed the door and returned to bed, his heart still unsteady. And beneath the chaos of his pulse, there was a warmth he didn't want. He pressed a hand to his chest like he could keep the feeling from spilling out. "Don't be fooled by sweetness," he told himself. But deep down, he already knew. This chase had only just begun. At 5:46, Ethan woke again, not to an alarm, to silence. Mornings in South Haven always had sound. Wind in the trees, a neighbor's car door, a distant dog barking at nothing. Today, the quiet felt too smooth, like someone had laid it carefully over the world, as if a large predator had spent the night inside the house and everything else had agreed not to breathe too loudly. Ethan lay still, staring at the ceiling. From the children's room came the steady rhythm of their breathing. From the living room, nothing. He held his breath instinctively, listening for movement. Then he smelled it. Cedar, very faint, like wood burning slowly in a fireplace far away. It was pressed down nearly to nothing, but still enough to tighten an Omega's nerves. Darian was still here. Ethan's chest sank, irritation rising after it like heat. He had said dawn. He had said leave. Ethan swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood barefoot on the cold floor, the chill sharpening his awareness. He crossed to the door and opened it a crack. The nightlight was still on. Darian wasn't on the couch. He was in the tiny kitchen, sleeves rolled to his elbows, staring at the battered coffee machine like it was alien technology. On the counter lay 2 slices of bread, a carton of eggs, a jar of peanut butter, and the bag of groceries Darian had brought last night. He was making breakfast. Ethan's first emotion wasn't gratitude. It was caution. What is this? His mind snapped. A tactic? A soft entry? Care that lowers my guard? He knew Darian's old patterns too well. Surround, perfect, provide, until you surrendered without realizing you had. Ethan pushed the door fully open. His voice came out cold. "What are you doing?" Darian startled like he'd been caught committing a crime. He turned quickly, hands held slightly away from his body, like he didn't want to seem threatening. "Did I wake you?" Darian asked, too careful. Ethan didn't answer, just stared. Darian's gaze dropped to Ethan's feet, bare on cold floorboards, thin sleep shirt, narrow shoulders. Something dark flashed in Darian's expression, like he wanted to say, "You're cold." He swallowed it. His voice softened even more. "I wanted to make breakfast. The kids will be hungry." "You don't need to," Ethan said flatly. "I want to." Darian replied, quiet. Then, after a pause, like he was sanding the edges down so it wouldn't hurt, he added, "If you don't mind." Ethan hated that phrase, because it meant Darian was learning boundaries, and Ethan didn't know how to fight a man who asked permission. He stepped into the kitchen doorway and let his eyes sweep the counter. "You know how to fry eggs?" Ethan asked, voice edged with mockery. Darian was silent for a second. "I can learn." Ethan's gaze drifted to the pan. The eggs were technically cooked, but the edges were a little burned and the center still pale. The toast had gone too long, one side dark, almost black. Something in Ethan wanted to laugh. He didn't allow it. Laughing would be admitting softness. Ethan reached forward and lowered the heat. His tone stayed flat. "You're going to burn down my kitchen." Darian stepped back instantly, giving Ethan space like he was protecting the only safe room Ethan had left in the world. "Okay," Darian said, obedient in a way that felt wrong. "Teach me." Ethan's fingers stilled. Teach you. He had once taught Darian small things. How to brew tea without bitterness. How to loosen his tie when he came home. How not to bring work into bed like a third body between them. Those gentle moments had turned into thorns later. Ethan forced his mind away from it. He flipped the half-raw eggs and spoke in clipped instructions. "Less oil. Don't blast the heat. Let the pan warm first before you crack them in." Darian watched him with a kind of attention that made Ethan's skin prickle. Not dominance. Focus. Like Ethan's words mattered. Like Ethan was worth listening to. Ethan slid the eggs onto a plate and pushed it toward Darian. "Eat." Darian looked up. "You're not eating?" "I'll eat with the kids," Ethan said. Darian didn't argue. He picked up a fork and took a bite. His brow creased slightly, still too charred. But he swallowed anyway, like it was a necessary bitterness. Then he said softly, "Thank you." Ethan's chest tightened. Hearing "thank you" from Darian felt more unreal than an apology. Before Ethan could respond, heavy footsteps thudded in the hall, fast, aggressive. Julian appeared in the doorway, hair wild like a cub's mane, eyes sharp despite the early hour. The second his nose caught Darian's scent, his entire body went alert. "Who's here?" Julian asked, voice low, hard. Ethan moved quickly to block him. "Go back." Julian stepped around Ethan like he barely existed. He saw Darian. Julian's nostrils flared as he tested the air, confirming what his instincts already knew. Then his eyes narrowed with hostility, like a young lion meeting an older male and refusing to bow. "Who are you?" Julian demanded. Darian set his fork down slowly. Every movement was measured, careful, as if sudden motion might trigger a fight. He didn't release scent. He didn't push. He didn't crush Julian with alpha pressure, which would have been the easiest, most instinctive thing. Instead, Darian simply looked at him and said, calm and low, "My name is Darian." Julian's jaw tightened. "Why are you here?" Ethan's pulse spiked. "Julian," but Darian spoke first, voice softer. "I'm here to see your daddy." Julian's eyes sharpened. "You know him?" Darian's gaze flicked to Ethan, asking without words, "How much can I say?" Ethan's fingers dug into his palm. He forced his voice to stay steady. "Go brush your teeth." Julian didn't move. He stared at Darian like he could smell lies. Ethan crossed the distance, crouched so he was eye level with his son, and lowered his voice. Go, brush your teeth, put on your coat, then come eat. Julian's chin stayed tense, stubborn, but Ethan lifted a hand and touched the top of his head, the gesture light, yet carrying an authority built from love and survival. Julian huffed, turned, and stomped back down the hallway like a declaration of war. Darian's eyes followed the small, furious back. Something trembled in Darian's expression. He's like you, Darian murmured, barely audible. Ethan shot back instantly, sharp as a reflex. He's not like you. Darian didn't argue. He simply lowered his gaze and swallowed whatever he'd wanted to say, like he understood he didn't have the right. A moment later, Ilara padded out, clutching her bear. She looked sleepy, then saw Darian and brightened the way she had the night before. "Tall man," she chirped. Darian's mouth softened, a small smile breaking through like light. He crouched to make himself less enormous. "Good morning." Ilara blinked at him. "You're still here." Darian's voice turned gentle. "Yeah, I didn't leave." Ilara thought about that, then asked, very quietly, "Will you stay and eat breakfast with us?" Darian's eyes softened so suddenly, Ethan almost flinched. Darian looked to Ethan, careful, asking. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't want to say yes. He didn't want to reject him in front of the kids either. In the end, he kept his voice cold. "You eat, then you leave." Darian nodded immediately, like it was mercy. "Okay." Landon came out last, teeth brushed, clothes on, calm as if he had already decided what this was and was simply observing. He stopped at the table, 3 children's plates, 1 set aside for Ethan, and Darian's plate, with its slightly burnt egg like evidence of effort. Landon sat, then looked at Darian with the cool curiosity of a scientist. "You're Alpha." Darian nodded. "Yes." "You're strong." Darian paused. "Maybe." Then Landon turned his gaze to Ethan, direct and devastating. "Daddy, are you afraid of him?" The question sliced straight through Ethan's defenses. Ethan gripped his cup, knuckles whitening, unable to answer immediately because the truth was too complicated. He feared Darian's methods, his possessiveness, the way he could turn love into a cage. But he also feared the part of himself that still reacted. Darian spoke into the silence, voice low and steady. "Your daddy doesn't need to be afraid of me." Ethan snapped his gaze up. Darian looked at him like a vow, like a promise made with teeth. "I'll learn how to come close the way he likes." Ethan's throat tightened. He looked away sharply. "Don't say things like that in front of them." Ilara chewed her toast and asked, muffled, "What does the way he likes mean?" Julian glared from the hallway. "Just eat." Ilara scowled. "You eat!" For a second, the room shifted back into ordinary life. Bickering, warmth, noise that felt like belonging. Darian sat at the edge of the table, like a stranger dropped into a family painting. He didn't speak more than necessary. He simply watched, quiet and careful, as if he feared that one wrong move would shatter something fragile. Ethan stared at his children eating, and suddenly his chest ached. The hardest part of the last 5 years hadn't only been money. It had been every morning at this table with only one adult seat filled. He didn't want someone to replace him. He didn't want saving. He just, sometimes, wanted someone across from him who asked softly, "Are you tired?" But he had never dared to want it. Not until now.
After breakfast, the house shifted into its usual morning choreography. Ethan tied Alara's hair with quick, practiced fingers. Julian wrestled with his jacket zipper like it was an enemy. Landon checked all 3 water bottles and lunchboxes with calm precision, moving down the line like a tiny quartermaster. Darian stood off to the side, present, quiet, awkward in a way Ethan still couldn't fully process, like a man who wanted to help but didn't know where his hands were allowed to exist. After a long second, Darian spoke softly. "Can I drive you to preschool?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "No." Darian nodded as if he'd expected it. "Okay." Ethan took the children's hands and headed for the door. His fingers were warm around theirs. His shoulders were not. Then he stopped. He turned back. Darian's eyes lifted immediately, hope flaring so fast it was almost humiliating to witness. Like he'd been starving, and Ethan had accidentally opened a pantry. Ethan's face stayed hard. "You stay here," Ethan said flatly. "Until I come back, don't touch anything. Don't move." Darian blinked. Then his expression softened in a way that didn't belong on a man like him. It looked like relief. It looked like gratitude. It looked like someone had punched him in the chest with kindness. "Okay," Darian said, voice low. "I'll wait for you." The words were light, but they landed in Ethan's ribs like something sweet that hurt. Ethan turned and walked out before his face could betray him, heart doing something unstable and stupid. Outside, the town was brightening. The fog had thinned, leaving the air clean and sharp. South Haven mornings had a quiet beauty that made Ethan angry sometimes, because beauty didn't pay tuition. Julian walked beside him without his usual noise, jaw tight, as if he were forcing himself not to bite. Halfway to preschool, Julian spoke, voice low. "Daddy, who is that alpha?" Ethan didn't look at him. "None of your business." Julian's brows pulled together. "But he smells like nothing that matters," Ethan cut in, faster than he meant to. Landon, walking on Ethan's other side, spoke without emotion. "He smells like us." Ethan's steps faltered for a fraction of a second. Alara looked up at Ethan, her small hand squeezing his. "He looks at you like Noah Uncle looks at you," she said in a careful little voice, like she knew it might be wrong but wanted to be honest. Something detonated in Ethan's chest so sharply he almost loosened his grip on their hands. "Alara," his voice dropped, edged with warning. "Don't compare." Alara's mouth pressed into a tiny line. She nodded immediately. "Okay." At the preschool gate, Ethan watched their small backs for 2 seconds after they disappeared inside. Then he turned and walked home fast, too fast. Like if he got there late, Darian would have already pushed deeper into his life, already found a crack big enough to slide through. Darian was still there, exactly where Ethan had left him. He sat on the couch, holding one of the children's storybooks, but he wasn't turning pages. It looked more like he'd chosen an object to hold, just so he wouldn't look like a man waiting too obviously in someone else's house. When the door opened, Darian's head snapped up. The look in his eyes was too clear, too naked, like a man who had been standing at the window for hours, and the moment you returned, his whole body remembered how to breathe. Ethan's chest tightened. He forced his face colder. "You didn't leave?" Darian rose slowly, careful with his movements. "You told me to wait." Ethan's throat went dry. He wanted to say, "I just didn't want you doing something insane," but Darian had heard the word wait and turned it into something fragile and hopeful, like Ethan had handed him a ribbon of possibility. Ethan hardened again, as if hardness could stop the world from moving. "What do you want?" he demanded. Darian went still. The silence that followed didn't feel calculated. It felt like searching, like a man digging through himself for an answer that wouldn't cut Ethan open. Finally, Darian spoke, voice low. "I want you to believe I'm not here to take your life away." Ethan's pulse kicked hard. Darian held Ethan's gaze and finished the sentence with a word that made Ethan's spine go taut. "I'm here to join it." Join. The word was dangerous. It wasn't, "I'm taking you home," which Ethan could hate cleanly. It was softer, sneakier, like water, like something that seeped under doors.
Ethan's laugh came out sharp. "Join? You? Can you wash dishes? Can you pick up kids? Can you sit with me when one of them has a fever at 2 a.m.? Can you handle a month when I can't pay everything without throwing money in my face like it's a leash?" Each question was a blade. Darian didn't flinch back. He took every cut and swallowed it like penance. "I can," Darian said. Ethan scoffed. "Easy to say." Darian's voice stayed steady, but it lowered, more serious than any vow Ethan remembered. "Then I'll do it. I'll show you." Ethan stared at him, chest hot, as if those words had struck a match inside him. He wanted to snap, "You can't." He wanted to say, "You don't get to." But he remembered the burned edges of the eggs. That clumsy effort didn't feel like performance. It felt humiliatingly real. Ethan bit the inside of his cheek. "How long are you staying today?" he asked, voice colder than necessary. Darian answered instantly, "As long as you want." The sweetness of it made Ethan want to swear. He turned away and went to the kitchen, grabbed a cloth, and began wiping the table too hard, like he could scrub off his own confusion. Darian followed, but kept 2 steps back, maintaining distance like a promise. "The tuition program," Darian began. Ethan's body tightened. "Don't." Darian stopped immediately. His voice softened. "I'm not here to force you back, and I won't use money to push you." Ethan's hand paused mid-wipe. Darian continued carefully, like each word had to pass a test. "But I want to know something. These 5 years, have you been carrying it all alone?" Ethan's throat tightened so hard he almost choked. He hated that question, because the answer made him look small.
and Ethan had sworn he would never be small again. He turned his head just enough to throw the words like a shield. "What does it matter to you?" Darian was quiet for 2 seconds. Then he said, voice so low it almost wasn't sound, "It matters to me." Ethan's fingers trembled. He dropped the cloth into the sink and spun to face him, anger flaring because it was safer than tenderness. "Don't talk like that." Darian's eyes softened further. Impossible. Like what? Ethan couldn't even find the insult, because that tone sounded like someone who wanted to belong, someone who wanted to come home. And that was the most dangerous thing Darian could become. Ethan sucked in a breath and looked away. "If you're going to stay," he said, forcing his voice steady, "there are rules." Darian nodded immediately. "Tell me." Ethan spoke with careful precision, building walls one sentence at a time. 1. You don't go into the kids' room. 2. You don't release your scent around them. 3. Outside this house, you don't say who you are. He paused. The 4th rule pressed against his tongue. Don't make me soften. He couldn't say it. Darian waited, still and patient, like he already knew what Ethan couldn't name. Ethan's jaw tightened. 4, he said coldly. You don't touch me. Silence. Darian swallowed, Adam's apple shifting once. Then he nodded, slow and clean. Okay. There was no complaint, only restraint. And that restraint made Ethan more uneasy than anger would have, because Darian was alpha. Alpha instinct was not restraint, but Darian was learning it for him. Ethan felt something ache inside his chest, and he understood with sudden clarity what the real danger was. Not Darian dragging him back. The real danger was Darian changing, and Ethan running out of reasons to say no. At 4 in the afternoon, Ethan went to pick up the kids. When they got home, a warm sweetness drifted through the air. Not pheromones, real sweetness, oven heat, sugar. The triplets burst inside, then stopped. Julian's nose twitched. Cookies? Alara's eyes went huge. Cookies! Landon didn't run. He walked into the kitchen like he was investigating a crime scene. On the counter sat a tray of small cookies, uneven and slightly imperfect, and beside them, Darian. Darian wore Ethan's old apron. The ties were knotted wrong, crooked at his waist, making him look absurdly out of place and somehow less dangerous. He pulled off oven mitts and crouched down, lowering himself to the kid's eye level like he didn't want to loom. You're back, he said softly. Alara ran straight to him like she'd decided last night that this was simply what she did with tall men. Did you make cookies? She asked. Darian nodded. I did. He hesitated, then added honestly, they might not be good. Julian frowned. You can bake? Darian glanced at the tray. I followed a recipe, burned them twice. Alara burst out laughing. You're silly. Darian smiled, gentle in a way that didn't belong on him. Yeah, I'm very silly. Ethan stood at the doorway, watching. His chest softened against his will. Darian didn't press authority on the children. He didn't demand to be called anything. He didn't use dominance to shape the room. He just crouched there, trying to be harmless, trying to be accepted. Chasing his wife so hard he'd lowered his pride all the way to the floor. Ethan's throat tightened. He stepped into the room, forcing his voice cold again. "Don't give them too much sugar. They won't eat dinner." Darian stood immediately. "Okay, 1 each." Julian protested instantly. 2. Darian looked at Ethan. Ethan glared. Darian corrected himself with a sigh of surrender. 1.5. Alara giggled. "You're scared of Daddy." Darian didn't deny it. He only said softly, "Yes, I'm scared he'll be upset." Ethan's heart jumped, sharp and wrong, because Darian's fear wasn't cowardice. It was carefulness. The kind of fear you feel when you don't want to lose something. Landon took a bite of cookie, chewed, considered. Then he asked, voice calm, "Are you going to stay?" The room went still. Ethan's spine locked. Darian's breath caught. Darian crouched again, eyes deep on Landon, like he understood that this wasn't a child's casual question. It was judgment, a negotiation. Darian answered carefully, steady. "If your daddy is willing, I will." Landon watched him, unblinking. "Will you run away?" Darian went quiet for 1 beat. Then his eyes shifted toward Ethan, not pleading, not forcing, asking permission, even to promise. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't want to give Darian hope. He didn't want to say no in front of the kids either. So he did what he always did when cornered. He escaped into practicality. "Eat first," Ethan said, voice clipped. He turned toward the kitchen with a stiffness that felt like flight. He didn't see it, but behind him, Darian watched his back with an expression so soft it looked like he might lift Ethan up and hold him there. Like a man truly chasing his wife, willing to use time, patience, and every slightly burnt cookie in the world to repay a love he'd owed for 5 years. The preschool entrance was noisy in the way small-town mornings always were. Parents clustered around their kids. Teachers greeted everyone by name. South Haven's social circle was a sticky web. Who stood with whom? Whose child wore what? Whose car parked where? Everything became tea-time currency by noon. Ethan was used to being watched. A single Omega raising triplets was, to people here, a spectacle dressed up as concern. He never looked back at the stairs. Looking back meant you'd already lost. But today, what he felt wasn't staring. It was pressure. A subtle ripple, like the air had been stretched by something large enough to make everyone unconsciously quiet down. Even the children's squeals softened for a beat. Ethan didn't need to turn his head to know why. Darian walked beside him. No helicopters, no black convoy, no guards. Just him. And yet his presence still broadcast the same message to the world. Here is what belongs to me. Ethan's spine tightened immediately. He tried to quicken his pace, to open distance like a shield, but Alara had already turned and caught Darian's fingertip with her tiny hand, as if she'd found a safety rope and refused to let go. "Tall man," she chirped, bright as sunlight. "You came too." Darian crouched, gaze soft. "I'll walk with you for a little bit." Alara leaned closer, whispering conspiratorially, "Do you have cookies today too?" Darian's mouth curved. If you're good today, I'll try again tonight. Ilera bounced. I want two. Darian looked up at Ethan, waiting for judgment like a man awaiting sentencing. Ethan didn't hesitate. 1. Darian nodded instantly. 1. Ilera pouted. Daddy's mean. Darian's voice dropped into something gentle that made Ethan's throat tighten. Daddy isn't mean, Darian said. He's protecting you. Protecting. Ethan had been protecting alone for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone translate his hardness into love. No one had ever stood next to him and said, he's not harsh, he's just scared you'll get hurt. Something in Ethan's chest twisted, sharp and tender at once. The teacher approached, smile noticeably more formal than yesterday. Good morning, Mr. Carter, she said. Then her gaze flicked to Darian, and her tone shifted, more cautious, more polite. And this is? Ethan opened his mouth. Darian stepped forward first. He stood tall, but didn't push. His voice was low, steady. No aggression, just a clean boundary. I'm Darian, he said. The children's family. Not father, not husband, not guardian. Just one word, quiet and dangerous in how normal it sounded. Family. Ethan's fingers went numb for a second. The teacher paused, then smiled again, more deferential this time. I understand. Today we were actually hoping to discuss the next steps for the early talent program, she said. Since the children's scores are exceptionally high, we'd like to schedule an advanced meeting. Ideally, all guardians would attend. Ethan's stomach sank. All guardians. That phrase carried the same implication as always. You alone aren't enough. Your Omega body is instability. Your lack of background is a weakness. Ethan's grip tightened around the children's hands. I already paid, he said, clipped. Yes, we received it, the teacher replied smoothly. This isn't about payment. It's about placement, training schedule, and long-term... Her gaze slid toward Darian again, polite, but unmistakably calculating. And you would also... Darian didn't look at her. He looked at Ethan, checking, asking with his eyes, are you being cornered? Do you want me to speak? Ethan's jaw tightened. He hated this. Hated that he needed anyone to look more legitimate beside him. He was silent 2 seconds too long, then forced the words out anyway. He can. 3 words, small, but they tasted like permission. Darian's gaze softened instantly, like Ethan had handed him something precious without meaning to. I'll be on time, Darian told the teacher. Calm, steady, almost like a vow. Ethan looked away and guided the kids inside. Julian paused at the doorway to shoot Darian a glare that was half warning, half claim. Don't get close. Darian didn't react with dominance. He only nodded once, respectful, like acknowledging a young lion's courage. Landon lingered a heartbeat longer, eyes too old for his face. Will you really come? He asked quietly. Darian lowered his voice, sweet enough that Ethan wouldn't have wanted to hear it. I will, Darian said, as long as your daddy doesn't kick me out. Landon stared for 2 seconds, like he was recording the statement for future trial. Then he turned and walked inside. The door shut. The children's world disappeared for the day. Ethan exhaled slowly, like his lungs had been locked. He turned to leave immediately. Darian didn't follow. He stayed where he was, as if he feared that one wrong step would make Ethan bolt again. "Ethan," Darian called softly. Ethan stopped without turning. "What?" Darian's voice was steady, too steady for how gentle it was. "I'm not here to take anything from you." Ethan's fingers clenched. Darian continued, slow, careful, like each word had to be earned. "I just want to stand next to you." It was too simple, too unlike Darian. And that was why it felt real. Ethan swallowed, throat tight. "Don't make this complicated," he said, cold on purpose. Darian's mouth twitched like he almost smiled. "You're the one who made me complicated." Ethan snapped his head around, eyes sharp. Darian immediately wiped the humor away, voice returning to restraint. "Sorry." Ethan's chest flared hot. He hated Darian saying sorry, because it stole the clean distance hate used to give him. Ethan worked the lunch rush like a machine. Chop, sauté, serve, wipe, repeat. But his mind was pinned elsewhere. The teacher's all guardians, Darian's stand next to you, and the way the children had reacted with instinctive curiosity and instinctive defense. He'd thought he could control the pace, but once Darian was in it, the pace stopped belonging to Ethan. Near dusk, the bell above the restaurant door chimed. Ethan looked up, heart sinking. Noah walked in. He wore a dark coat, expression neutral, but his eyes were heavier than usual, cooler, sharper. Noah took one look at Ethan and knew something had shifted. "I heard," Noah said quietly, voice tight around the edges, "that today the preschool had an extra family member." Ethan's fingers tightened around a cloth. He didn't answer. Noah's gaze slid to the corner, where a grocery bag sat, and a dark scarf that wasn't Ethan's. Noah's mouth twitched, humorless. He's back. Not a question, a confirmation. Ethan set the cloth down. His voice came out flat. "Yes." Noah went still for 2 seconds, holding something down inside himself. "You let him into your house?" he asked. Ethan lifted his eyes, icy. "That's my home. I decide." Noah's jaw tightened. "I know, but you said you wouldn't let any alpha near you again." A sting hit Ethan's chest. Had he said that? He remembered saying, "I'll protect the kids." He hadn't promised no alpha. That boundary was Noah's quiet hope, written over Ethan's life like a private rule. Noah stepped closer, voice lower. "Ethan, do you know what kind of man he is?" Ethan laughed once, short and bitter. "Better than anyone." Noah's eyes tightened with pain. "Then why would you still—" Ethan cut him off, the truth dropping hard. "Because I used the card." Noah froze. Ethan didn't soften it. "I paid the tuition. I didn't have the money. What did you want me to do? Use you? Let you pay and then owe you for the rest of my life?" Noah's face went paler. You know that's not... But you want an answer, Ethan said, voice colder. Noah, I don't hate you, but I can... He stopped because the next words were too cruel. I can't love you. Noah was silent. He looked at Ethan like someone had dragged glass across his skin. Then he asked the question that hit the deepest. So if he comes back, you can? Ethan's pulse slammed once, violent. That was the wound. He wanted to deny it, wanted to say, no, this isn't about him. But he couldn't deny the gravity Darian still had in his body, in his instinct, in the part of him that never fully healed. Ethan's voice went low, almost a warning. Don't push me. Noah's shoulders sank just slightly, like he understood at last. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about time. It was about the door in Ethan's heart that had never closed all the way. The bell chimed again. The air changed. Darian walked in. No suit, no entourage, no dominance performance, just a bag of milk and fruit, like a man coming home from work, stopping at the store on the way. But the second he crossed the threshold, the room shifted. Noah's gaze turned sharp as a blade. Darian looked at Noah and spoke calmly, as if identifying a fact. You're Noah. Noah's laugh was cold. You know me? Darian's voice stayed even. I looked you up. You were with him for 5 years. Noah's hand curled into a fist. You looked me up? Darian didn't deny it. I needed to know how you kept them alive. Ethan's chest tightened. Darian, don't... Darian stopped immediately, gaze flicking to Ethan. Okay, Darian said quietly. I won't. That single obedience, so fast, so instinctive, hit Noah like a punch. Noah's eyes sharpened with a different kind of pain. Because it wasn't power making Darian listen. It was Ethan. Noah breathed in, voice tight. Why are you here? Darian set the bag on the counter. To drop these off, the kids need milk. Noah scoffed. You didn't bring milk for 5 years. Darian's eyes darkened, but he didn't strike back. So I'm bringing it now, he said simply. Noah's temper flared. You think a bag of milk fixes enough? Ethan's voice cut through the room like a blade. Both men stopped instantly. Ethan braced his hands on the counter, knuckles white, breathing hard. He looked at Noah, then at Darian, voice trembling with controlled fury. I don't need you two fighting, and I'm not a prize. Noah's expression cracked, softening with shame. Darian lowered his gaze, immediate apology in posture. Ethan swallowed, forcing the sweetness of his pheromones back down, refusing to leak vulnerability into the air. The only thing I care about is the kids, Ethan said. Then he turned his gaze on Darian, voice razor cold. If you want to make up for anything, you follow my rules. Don't love me the way you want to. Darian lifted his eyes. Then your way, Darian said quietly. Ethan's chest jumped. Darian added, softer, offering himself like he'd offered his pride in the kitchen. Teach me. Noah watched that exchange like he was bleeding. He went quiet for a long moment, then spoke with careful gentleness. Ethan, I only need to ask you one thing. Ethan turned. Noah's voice was barely above a whisper. "If he's back, are you going to kick me out?" Ethan's heart clenched so hard it hurt. He wanted to say no. But Noah didn't want a seat at the table. Noah wanted Ethan's love, and Ethan couldn't give it. His silence, 1 second too long, was the answer. Noah gave a small, broken smile, eyes wet but pride intact. A mature beta forcing himself not to beg. "I understand," Noah said quietly. He looked at Darian, still cold, but with a tired kind of acceptance. "You'd better not make him cry again." Darian didn't retaliate. He only answered, low and steady, "I won't." Noah turned and left. The bell chimed. Wind rushed in, then the door shut. The restaurant settled into an aching quiet. Only Ethan and Darian remained. And the bag of milk on the counter, ordinary and lethal, because it meant Darian was learning how to enter daily life. Ethan stared at it, throat tight. "You've made everything messy," Ethan said softly, exhausted. Darian stepped closer, then stopped at a distance Ethan could bear. "I know," Darian said, "but I'm not here to destroy your life." Ethan's laugh was sharp. "Is that what you thought 5 years ago, too?" Pain moved across Darian's face like a shadow. He was silent for several seconds before he spoke. 5 years ago, I thought love meant owning." Ethan's chest tightened. Darian looked at him like he was cutting himself open. "Now I know love is allowing. Allowing you to say no. Allowing you to run. Allowing you to come back at your own speed." Ethan's eyes burned. He hated how close he was to tears. He hated that Darian's words were hitting every craving he'd buried. Respect, permission, being treated like a person, not an Omega accessory. Ethan lifted a hand and pressed it over his eyes, voice shaking. "You don't owe me money." Darian's breath caught. Ethan dropped his hand and met his gaze, voice like a wound. "You owe me a love I can breathe inside." Darian's eyes went wet. He didn't step closer. He didn't touch. He only said, low and sure, "Then that's what I'll give you." Ethan's chest ached, almost laughable. "You'll give? You think you can?" Darian's voice softened further, not dramatic, just absolute. "I'll spend my whole life learning how." That promise was too long, too heavy. Ethan couldn't hold it. So he turned away and spoke like he was surrendering to something he despised in himself. "You can come back tonight." Darian went still, startled. Ethan added quickly, cold again, protecting himself. "Back to my place. Sleep on the couch. Don't wake the kids." Darian's eyes brightened like flame. And then he forced the joy down, obedient to the rules, careful with the gift. "Okay," he whispered. Ethan moved toward the door like he couldn't afford to look at him too long. Behind him, Darian paused and said softly, "Ethan." Ethan didn't turn. "What?" Darian's voice was so gentle, it was almost unbearable. "Thank you for giving me a road home." Ethan's fingers gripped the door handle until his knuckles whitened. He didn't answer, because if he did, he might cry. But he didn't shut the door. He walked out first, and he let Darian follow, like permission, like beginning, like a family finally taking one step in the same direction.